In Chapter 3 of the Porsche Carrera 911 build, I will hand paint and add parts as needed to the underframe. Please note that we are following the instructions on page 9 and going into page 10 of the Revell booklet in this chapter. There are 10 detailed pages of instructions to this build. The first item is to paint flat black on the posts that will hold the front wheel assemblies that allow the wheels to turn left and right. This kit is new, so the build and the videos are highly detailed. The transmission and rear axle assembly support is cemented in place in the groove in the underframe. It appears that support only fits one way due to the difference in pin sizes that goes into the holes. Test fit the motor and frame in place before you cement everything. Note that the Porsche 911 Carrera model has the engine in the rear, as do most Porsche cars. Everything I will talk about the engine compartment and rear wheels, axle, and other parts pertains to the rear portion of the underframe. When cementing the engine with transmission and frame into the compartment, make sure the pin on the transmission fits into the hole in the underframe and that the frame sits snugly in the underframe. This guarantees that the other parts that have to be added to the motor won't give you any problems. We are now finished page 9 of the instruction booklet. Flat black TCP 805 is hand painted on areas of the rear axle assembly. Follow the instructions on page 10 for what areas need to be painted. The whole assembly was originally spray painted aluminum in Chapter 1. I am hand painting the 50-50 mix of gold and aluminum I made previously on the rear brake hoses. Only a small area is painted per the instructions on page 10. These parts were previously painted matte black in Chapter 1. Now I am ready to cement the brake line hoses into the transmission. Note, this isn't how they would be attached on the real Porsche, but how they are fitted in on the model. Notice I put the underframe on a cloth so as not to damage the paint on the underframe while doing this operation. These brake lines only fit one way into the holes on the transmission. They are different size pins with flat areas, so they end up almost touching the brakes when these are mounted. Now cement the rear axle assembly into the undercarriage and onto the supports. that was positioned earlier. I used a pencil's eraser to push the assembly down into the holes. It needs to be tight so you won't have issues putting on the brakes and the wheels later. I am hand painting aluminum on the bracket and bolt area of the rear tie rod. The exhaust system is next to cement in place. Notice there are 6 pins that need to be fitted in place. Again, I am using a cloth to prevent damage of any paint. Hold in place a few seconds to allow some curing. Test fit the rear tie rod first, as it only fits in one way. Now you're ready to cement the tie rod into the underframe. Hold it in place to make sure it is tight. The brake discs and wheel holders for the front and rear wheels are being sprayed TCP 013 gloss aluminum on both sides. As we have done in earlier chapters, I am spraying at 28 to 30 psi using a Vega 2000 airbrush fitted with a medium or 0.5 millimeter tip and moving the parts to ensure complete coverage. Notice I did both sides of the parts the same way. Hand painting TCP 804 flat grimy black on the brake shoes of 4 of the disc brakes. First automobile model I have seen with this feature molded in the parts for the wheels. Revell did a nice job to make an outstanding kit. TCP 805 flat black is being hand painted on the front wheel pivot points of both the left and right wheel parts. Do not paint the pins on the top and bottom of the pivot area. These pins have to float free in the holes in the underframe and the front pan that will be cemented in later. This is because you want the wheels to turn in place. The front wheel assembly of the disc brakes and pivot sections are the next parts to cement together. You must put in a bearing between the parts that will allow the tires to rotate freely. Do not cement these bearings in place. Note that they only fit into the parts one way, with the larger end going into the pivot section. As you hold the disc brake onto the pivot part, noting again they only fit one way. Use liquid cement on the outside of the contact area to put these together. Do not get any glue or cement into the bearing. Set these aside for several hours as you are going to handle these parts many times when attaching them to the tie rod. This nearly finishes page 10 of the instructions. If you have any questions about techniques explored in this video, or general questions about this build, please post your questions in the comments section below.